The truth is we all have a personal brand. So those who want to look away or like an ostrich put their head in the sand, they'll do so at their own peril because we all have a personal brand, whether we know it or not. And it's important that we get introspective so that we understand it because all good branding is storytelling. You think about all the best brands are telling stories. And so we, if we're interviewing or aspiring to get promoted, if we have a job, there's a story that we need to tell.
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in.
Brand has always been your cup of tea, right?
Yes. Yeah, I'm a big branding guy, and I hate to use the word expert because that sounds pompous, but I've had the good fortune to work with some pretty big brands as well as to work with some pretty big agencies on big brands, such as Leo Burnett on McDonald's and DDB on Frito-Lay. So I've kind of seen it from both sides, and it's a passion of mine. I love building teams and I love building brands in that order.
Yeah. And you've done that for so long, for so many well-known brands. And tell me about that career. What got you started in the beginning? I'd love to know.
Well, I went to school, undergrad, to go to law school.
Oh, wow.
You can't major in pre-law. And so I had the good fortune of a professor who said, well, how do I, prepare for law school? And he said, well, you're going to do a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of critical thinking, and a lot of presentations. I said, yes. So he said, well, you should think about School of Journalism because you're going to be doing a lot of those things as well. So I got into the School of Journalism and specifically marketing communications, thinking that I'll learn all those things. And I did. What I didn't realize is how much I enjoyed doing that. And that same professor said, are you sure you want to go to law school? Have you thought about graduate school instead? And I said, no, I kind of had my mind set on this thing until I started interviewing people, fraternity brothers of mine that were in law school or those who've been in for a while and those who even had their name on the door. And one common denominator was that nobody was happy and nobody was encouraging. So I thought, well, why would I do that? So I ended up going to graduate school at Northwestern and getting a master's in integrated marketing communications. And that kind of started that whole idea of brand building and doing it in an integrated way, very strategically, thoughtfully, planfully, and looking at the whole brand, not just the external brand that is customer facing, but also the internal brand. And now I've come up with this model that has 4 brands. It's the personal brand, that answers the question, who am I? There's the internal brand, which is the collective we, and answers the question, what do we stand for? And then there's the external brand that most people think of, and that is to answer the question, what value is exchanged here? And then finally, more today than ever before, is the employer brand. And that answers the question, do I belong here? And belonging is a really key, component to personal and professional success, I've found.
Mark, when did you start thinking about it in that framework? When did this idea pop into your mind? Was it recent or was it when you were working with the brands? I want to understand the process of you moving out of executive roles and into the realm of advocating and writing books. When did that happen?
Well, ironically, I got an epiphany literally almost 10 years ago. It was February 21st, 2013. And it was a company that was at the Cheesecake Factory and was recruited to a $500 million casual restaurant dining concept. And I was asked to turn the brand around, which was down double-digit negative sales, as well as put a new brand positioning out there that was more relevant, more contemporary, that would allow then a new concept to kind of build on top of this one that would attract capital from our parent company. So my team and I did that. And I guess we were so successful and so soon, within a couple of years, the CEO came to me and said, well, instead of putting more capital behind this brand, we're going to the board's decided to move in a different direction. We're going to seek strategic alternatives. But don't worry, you'll still be leading the charge. And, whoever buys you, if someone buys you, will I'm sure want to keep you and your team on because you guys have done such a brilliant job. Long story short, the deal closes on a Friday. On Monday morning at 8 o'clock, I'm called into this conference room to meet with the new CEO. And the whole idea was we were going to then plan our new future together. At 8:05, I'm out the door. We've decided to move in a different direction. And so this was, for the U.S., that would be the first signs of spring in Southern California, where I lived at the time, were starting to emerge. And after a fitful night of sleep, I get up the next morning, and Renata, as God is my witness, I go outside to take the dog out. And as the sun was coming up over this wall we had in our backyard, it shone on this fig tree that was barren from the 6 or 7 weeks of winter we do get in Southern California. But there on the end of one branch was this tiny little green sprig of a leaf just starting to emerge.
Wow.
And it was there I got this epiphany that leaf is a symbol of growth and rebirth. And I took the dog inside. I started kind of banging out a treatment on my computer for this whole idea that all growth happens through the leaf of a plant or a tree. And then I was someone who believed in what was called the rule of threes, or is called the rule of threes. If you focus on 3 things, you'll be able to get more done, be more productive, and have greater results. My 3 things were leadership, engagement, and accountability. And that was my mantra. And I led with that every week in emails. Back in the day, we used to do broadcast voicemails. I would use it as part of recognition reward programs. Renata's doing a wonderful job of leading her team, or she's engaging people on a deeper level, or maybe she's holding them accountable. But what happened was when I looked at that leaf idea, I felt like there was actually a 4th element. The LEAF model now stands for leadership, engagement, accountability, and fulfillment. What we didn't have was a sense of fulfillment. And so that turned into a 4-circle Venn diagram that all revolves around purposeful growth. That fig tree in my backyard only knows how to be a fig tree, right? So that's its purpose. And so it also goes through its seasons, whereas leadership stands for the seed and root system, that you have to have strong leadership to get alignment. Engagement represents the trunk, the branches, and the system of nourishment, which in Spanish, savia, translates to English as lifeblood. What's the lifeblood of any organization? It's people. And you need to engage them with their heart, head, hands, and habits to where it leads to empowerment. And then you have the leaf and the fruit, which is the achievement of that particular plant or tree. And in a business organization, it's what we're in business to do. And then finally, you have fulfillment, which represents the ecosystem, the sun, the soil, the rain, that allows for a nurturing environment so photosynthesis can occur and then growth can happen. In our world, we would call that a culture. And so that kind of 4-circle Venn diagram model has served as the foundation for a lot of my thesis. So before, I used to think of a brand in kind of a 2-circle Venn diagram, internal and external. And we were taught that. And most people were really in marketing taught the external, but I was someone who was a believer that if you don't have the internal brand aligned with what you're saying, you're making promises that your operations or training teams can't keep. And so I always felt like it was important to have those 2 together. Well, now we're more comfortable with people having more diversity and having a personal brand that they can bring to the table. And so you put that in there. Well, then finally, that 4th brand I've come up with is the employer brand. So that's designed to attract and retain. So when I say the question of that one is, do I belong here? Belonging is so very important today. And we're in a new world of work. We don't have the same appetite for a command and control style of management that some of us put up with over the years. Now, millennials and Gen Z, and I have 26-year-old twin daughters, so I can guarantee you their desire for command and control style management is 0. Yes. And their expectation in this new world of work is so much different than what we put up with kind of back in the day. So I say the word belonging because it's so important. When you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity just gets us in the door. That's great. Equity gives us an equal voice. Better yet, inclusion gets us a seat at the table. Hooray. But if we don't feel we belong, we're likely not going to be vulnerable enough to give of our very best. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to say something maybe that might be controversial or might get us sent out of the room, right? We worked so hard to get here. And so that word belonging is so important. And now, I don't know what the job market is in Australia, but it's pretty good in the US, where young people today are basically having their choice. And they're saying, I want to work for a company that's purposeful. I don't want to just, go work for somewhere where I feel like I'm just an employee. I want to feel like a team member. And so that, my journalism background, words matter, right? And
Yes.
so the idea of building not just a culture, but a community. Now, culture is not a bad word, but I think it's often misunderstood and very often overused. But a culture to me is a place where someone feels they merely are a part of. Not bad, but a community is a place where they feel they belong in. See the difference? And when
Yes.
you feel like you belong, like a member of a team, you're going to want to do better. You're not going to want to quietly quit. You're not going to want this great resignation where you feel like you have to chase something else. You're going to be in an environment where you're allowed to be all you're capable of being and feel like a true member of a team.
Mark, your ideas are so on point for 2024. Were they this well thought through back in 2013?
No.
Or has the pandemic and the things that are
Yes.
happening? Yeah, okay.
You're dead on. And I will say,
Yeah.
while the epiphany that led to the writing of this book, and I never thought it was going to be a book, by the way, it was just kind of a cathartic hobby as I licked my wounds after what happened until I got my next opportunity. But I started kind of, talking to some friends and people I admired about it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is really good. And so I kept kind of working on it, and it went from a presentation to actually prose that led to a chapter, that led to an outline, that led to a bigger, and it finally got done. All of that kind of, I say, revolved. I came up with a purpose statement a few years ago, and it says, I don't want to just make money and retire. I want to make a difference and inspire. And that means making a difference in the lives of others and inspiring them to want to do likewise. And I realized that most of my career, I had been doing that in a way, but I hadn't articulated it. I hadn't thought through it that way. I wasn't maybe ready for it. Much like COVID gave us all a bit of a timeout to deeply reflect on not only what, but who matters most in our lives. And when we did that, we said, I don't think when we go back to work, I want to do the same thing. And I'm not the one saying that. The Sloan School of Management, and that will mean something to you in a minute, at MIT here in the US did a survey of 34 million people who left the workplace during COVID and asked them a simple question: why? And the number one answer, Renata, by over 10 times more than the second most given answer, was toxic work environment. It's as if people said, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take anymore. Life's short. None of us know, when our last day might be, whether we got sick ourselves, whether we had a loved one who was hospitalized, or God forbid, someone we know or love died as a result. We were sheltered in place. We were in fear of the unknown. This wasn't a US issue. It was a global issue. It didn't know skin color, age, gender. It was really scary. And I think that made a lot of people really kind of double down and say, I want to be more purposeful with whatever time I have, and not just in the third of the time I'm awake, not sleeping or working, but also in the time I'm working. And why can't I live and work on purpose and feel a deeper sense of satisfaction, and I'll say fulfillment? But it came to me over several years. And I'm telling you, if I had gotten that book written and out there before COVID, it wouldn't have landed the way it's landed now.
Yes.
It'd have been too soon, and the world wouldn't have been ready for it. Whereas today, I believe that people are now more ready than ever before.
And talking about being ready for it, you mentioned your kids, and I feel like younger generations can articulate the need for purpose and fulfillment much better than people our age. My
Yes.
clients are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and for them, coping with toxic environments is just what work has always been.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with a father who was an executive in the 80s. Of course, I know what toxic environment is.
Yes.
I had that white collar experience of watching my dad go through, some very tough times in a ruthless corporate environment. And I myself experienced that throughout my executive career. For us, it seems like such a privilege, doesn't it, to embrace purpose and fulfillment. How did you transition in your mind, from both an ego perspective and also hierarchy of needs perspective, to embrace this new way of thinking?
Well, For me, it came from a spiritual source. And so I would like to think that I've been leading in this manner for a long time because it's the right thing to do, right? It's the old, treat others the way you'd like to be treated, the golden rule, right? But I found it was more effective. And I found I was having more fun by building a relationship. And as we were talking, two of my passions are building teams and building brands. And in that order, I love building teams. And to do that, and having been on many sports teams and many other teams throughout my life and career, there are some common denominators. And there's a sense of duty. There's a sense of trust that all builds into a relationship. So instead of, and I used the word management before on purpose, is most of us who went to business school were taught how to manage. We went to a school of management. We took management classes, right? And so you're managing people, resources, budgets, projects, timelines, results, metrics, all those things, right? And those are foundational and you have to have them. But now they're really just transactional. So take it to the next step. We go from manager because we're, maybe a good doer, but no one taught us how to lead. So now you become a leader. And so my passion is to now give back, and I call it pay it backwards, and I'll tell you why in a minute, it is to pay it backward to help others become better leaders, because I know what it's like to serve a leader who I want to follow. But now take it a step further than that, and that's relational. So take it a step further than that, and now I want to create legacy builders. And those are the leaders you not just want to follow, but you want to emulate, and you want to be like them. So now you're creating more pods of leadership and more other legacy builders, and you're now over time going to change this tired old command control paradigm. It will soon go the way of the dodo bird, I believe. and as younger people, get older and now have more opportunities for, positions of influence within a given company, they're the ones that are going to make this change happen. Why I call it the purposeful growth revolution, because revolutions often start from the people, right? Yes. Who are dissatisfied with the status quo and they want change. So it's not going to likely come from the top down. It's going to come from the bottom up. And that's really why I've been blessed to have been given this epiphany to use my background, my experiences, all written about in the book, as well as observations of those I admire, research that supports my thesis. And some just came out literally 2 days ago from Deloitte that I just put in my LinkedIn newsletter that really goes further to substantiate this idea of my goal to put the human back in human resources. And that's really what I want to do. And especially in this day and age with robotics and machine learning and chat GPT with artificial intelligence, and all of this stuff is taking the human out of us. But I want to make sure we put it back in the right way. And I have a whole model that I've developed that's not in the book, but it's in the bonus section of an interview I did for the audiobook that's going to come out next week. And that's late February for those of you, depending on when this airs.
We can put a link in the show notes for that. One thing that I think is interesting, all of the things that you're saying are just so spot on with 2024 and how people are thinking about their careers. Having said that, a lot of people have a big issue with the words personal branding. They tend to turn their nose to personal branding. And it's something that I wanted to discuss with you as a brand expert that you are. How do you overcome that myth and that sort of weird feeling people have about building their own brand for career advancement?
Yeah, and the truth is we all have a personal brand. So those who want to look away or like an ostrich put their head in the sand, they'll do so at their own peril, because we all have a personal brand, whether we know it or not. And it's important that we get introspective so that we understand it, because all good branding is storytelling. You think about all the best brands are telling stories. And so we, if we're interviewing or aspiring to get promoted, if we have a job, there's a story that we need to tell that, to me, is woven between the 4 P's of the marketing mix, only I changed the P slightly. I remember in school, it was product, price, place, promotion. Okay, well, now it's problem. Okay, and it's packaging And, there's ways to go about problem solving, right? Anybody who is hiring to solve a problem. So what problem can you uniquely solve, and how do you articulate that in a story, right? And so then you package yourself with how you look, how you speak, and how you act. And that becomes your packaging. So we go to a shelf and we see all these shampoos. We read the label, right? We look at the ingredients. We look at what it's going to do for us. All of them are going to clean hair at some point, but who's going to do it in a way that's going to uniquely attract me to pick that particular brand off the shelf? And then to think about the performance aspect is obviously we got to live up to our promise, right? So you got to demonstrate how you're going to live up to the story you're telling and have proof points to give someone a sense of confidence that you're going to perform. So how many of us have been seduced by a great TV ad or radio commercial, or maybe just a product on a shelf? And we've said, wow, it says it can do all these things. It looks attractive. I'm going to buy it. I didn't like it. I'd go to a restaurant where the food looked so good on TV, and there it's served, it was not as good, or the service wasn't good. So the performance didn't live up to the storytelling. And then you get into promotion. Now, how do you package all that? And I use the term brand you. So your personal brand. In the book, I call it brand you, because every one of us has a unique personal brand that gets after who we are, what we stand for, what problem that we solve, and then how do we package ourselves to be the right best candidate that gets actually selected for the position that we seek. And it's that hard and it's that simple.
Yes. What do you think your brand is now?
Well, I think I put it down to 4 words, trying to focus. I inspire purposeful growth. So my brand is all about growth. I'm a growth junkie, right? But not just growth for the sake of growth, purposeful growth. I define it. And so also I want to inspire, as I said in my purpose statement, I don't want to just make money and retire. I want to make a difference and inspire. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, or you go to my website, or you buy the book, all of that is designed to be integrated up underneath that brand positioning of I inspire purposeful growth. If you want to learn how to live and work on purpose in ways that not only fulfill you, but help make the world better, I'm your guy. If you just want to work for a paycheck and go play golf on the weekends, I'm not, right? So there are brands that say, here's what we do and here's what we don't do. And that's really what I stand for. So the back half of my life and career is all around purposeful growth, and how do I lead this purposeful growth revolution so that whenever I'm done, I can look back and say I fulfilled my purpose.
For most professionals, it's way harder to pitch yourself and to identify the keywords and the 4 words as you've done for themselves than it is to do for others, than it is to do for their employers when they're doing strategy or planning for work. It seems like it flows and it's so easy. When they're doing it for themselves, it's super hard. What is your advice for employers, for
I think
people that find it really hard to talk about this?
Well, in my book, I talk about there are 4 dimensions of you. There is who you think you are, who you actually are, who others see you as being, and then who you desire to become, right? And so there are different tools and techniques to kind of get a sense of, who you are from a personality perspective, whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISC or StrengthsFinders, Enneagram. There's just a number of different ways that you can kind of look at yourself from that perspective. But also, I would say, you're right, by the way, it's easier to consult on someone else's business. And I found even as a brand, expert, it was tough for me to build my personal brand because, for one, I'm a team guy. So I don't want it to come across as ego at all. I'm uncomfortable with my website being my name, but I did that because I'm trying to build my personal brand. My actual, corporate name is Leaf Growth Ventures, but nobody knows who that is yet. So I'm just doing that, and I'm uncomfortable doing it, but I'm realizing I'm doing it for a bigger, broader reason, is to help others, not myself. And so I think I'd say is get someone who, some people do 360s at work, but maybe just informal feedback. And you ask people, what do you think I stand for? What are my strengths? What are areas I have to work on? If I were a brand, what would you say about me? And get that feedback and incorporate it in your own, because that kind of self-awareness and emotional intelligence will kind of help you coalesce that. Because oftentimes we don't have as much awareness of how we come across to people. And it's okay to ask. And, if you have a listening ear, you're going to learn some things about yourself, maybe some things you don't want to hear, but you're better off learning about, the good, the bad, and the ugly so that you can use that to help bolster your brand story and look for ways to improve. And maybe there's some blind spots and you will thank them for letting you know.
Yes. No, that's great advice. I do that a lot with my clients as well. We have a protocol that we follow, like similar to a 360. So I completely agree. One thing that I struggle with when I'm talking to clients, it happened yesterday, and I want to know if that happens to you as well, is when you say, I'm for purposeful growth. I care about purpose. I care about feeling fulfillment at work. And somebody comes to you and say, oh, I don't have the privilege of doing that. All I need is a job. And I get that. And I understand that place. I've been there. I know how it feels to be in survival mode, to really be in that situation. But in hindsight now, what I know and what my client, from yesterday doesn't know is that even if all you need is a job, if there is a purpose behind your trajectory, it's much easier for you to get that job. Whereas if you don't have, that purpose and that sense of a true path for you to follow, it's harder for you to convince an employer to hire you. Yeah. How do you explain in your words that feeling that people are missing out on, but you just, need to find a way to translate that to them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Renata. I spoke with a person not too long ago who works for a large, very global business services company. And, they do a lot of analysis, and her particular team's job was to do the analysis to provide information for their sales team. And she was kind of going through a little bit of some doldrums with some of her team members. And she and I were talking about this whole idea of purposeful growth and how do you infuse purpose in your work. And I said, well, tell me some of your clients. And she did. And she said, one of them was Pfizer and one of them was this. And stop right there. One of your clients is Pfizer, who's in on the ground floor of the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
So might you tell your team that what you're doing to support your client is helping save lives? Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. And you're actually part of all of the people that are working so hard around the clock to eradicate or mitigate the risks of COVID and the downsides, et cetera. I hadn't thought of it that way. I will bet you I can find something in anybody's job function that can be purposeful. And when you find that, all of a sudden it makes you think differently. Instead of just like logging in, logging out, and getting paid every other week and working for the weekend, now you're finding a little more inspiration, and you're going to maybe want to work a little bit harder, or maybe want to feel a deeper sense of ownership in the outcome, because you now see something purposeful in what you do every day.
That's a very good point, because even the people that challenge me on my way of coaching and thinking and say all they need is a job, there's amazing amount of purpose in what they do. They're just not tapping into that because they are looking at it from a very narrow view.
Absolutely. I remember I grew up as an age group swimmer and played other sports, but that was my thing. And I then became a lifeguard. I taught lessons. I coached the swim team. And then I got promoted from a guard to manager of the whole pool. And it was a public pool. And so I had to learn how to do the money scheduling. I had to be the one that got in early to get the deep end clean if there was a party in the parking lot the night before and there were beer bottles or whatever, because I was worried about the safety of the people that came there and entrusted my team and I with a safe environment. Well, I didn't realize it then as a dumb teenager, but later on, I gravitated towards a career that linked service, hospitality, entertainment, in creating experiences that were fulfilling for people. And so I then worked for the Cheesecake Factory as the head of marketing. I worked for Universal Studios Hollywood as the head of sales and marketing. I worked at a senior leadership position in J.C. Penney in retail. And then I've been a CMO and a brand president for several retail or restaurant concepts. So the common thread for me that was woven through all of that took root when I was a teenager, but didn't really come to blossom until years later.
Interesting. When you decided to, I'm assuming what you have now is your own business, right?
Yes, it's called Leaf Growth Ventures. Yes.
Yes. So with the Leaf Growth Ventures, it's yours. It's your business.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the decision-making process that you took from thinking, okay, I don't want another full-time role. I don't want another senior executive role. I'm going to try my hand at being an entrepreneur and have my own business. How did that play out for you, both for yourself and for those around you? Because a lot of my clients go through that crossroad where they can opt for one thing or another, and they feel a sense of sunk cost mentality, but I've invested so much already in this. And the other issue that they face is the backlash from the network. What? What are you telling me? You're not going to find another job. What are you thinking? How did that play out for you?
Well, I would tell them the same thing I had to tell myself.
Ah.
Get the FUD out. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, doubt, and delay. There's a reason why it took 10 years for this epiphany to turn itself into a book that now has become my business. Fear of failure. What will they think? What if it's not any good? Uncertainty. Am I, willing to give up a well-paying C-level position for the uncertainty and risk of something I feel called for? And then the doubt that creeps in, those background voices that can get in the back of your head and then go into the foreground and tell you, well, no one knows who you are. You're nobody special. Why would someone want to learn from you?
Yeah.
That then leads to delay. Like after all those three things, who wants to do anything? I'll just give myself a shot of dopamine and make myself feel good in a moment, and I'll come back later. And that's what I did. So I put this off because I had to get out of my own way, and I had to get the FUD out. So I've overcome FUD with an anecdote. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, I do, of course.
So faith overcomes fear. Faith in yourself, faith in a higher power, if you will, faith in a concept that you believe so strongly in, and then hope overcomes uncertainty. The hope you have in a richly imagined future and being able to do your own thing and what that means for your family, your friends, your community, and whoever you're employing. And then belief overcomes doubt. Again, you can believe in a higher power, and that's great, but believing in yourself, believing that you have what it takes to be successful, to remove those doubts. And then finally, action, indeed purposeful action that will overcome the paralysis of delay. You got to keep moving forward. And so I had to go through FUD and use that anecdote so I could get my book done. I could get my website set up. I could get my business set up, my self-assessment, my LinkedIn profile updated, LinkedIn newsletter started. I mean, all these fundamental things that I knew I had to establish that as a foundation to keep moving forward. And give yourself grace when things aren't moving as fast, because I'm a type A plus personality, a serial achiever, and a still recovering perfectionist. I thought everything had to be perfect or I couldn't take the next step. And now I understand that it's more about progress than perfection, because you'll never be perfect.
You and I are very similar. We have very similar trajectories out of executive roles into our own businesses. I love what you've explained, and the faith and the hope and the belief. Love that. That's very much in my zone of coaching as well. But I have another thing that I want to share with you that I think is really beneficial. It might be something that you end up adopting in the way that you explain it. Because when people want to do big career transitions and they're working with me, they tell me they don't have the confidence. They say, I need to work with you because I don't have confidence in this idea. And I'm like, of course you don't. What you need is courage. Courage
I
is
like that.
different from confidence, right? So what you need to do something new is not confidence, because confidence is incremental and you will build it over time. The first year of your business will not be as good as your second year, as your third year, as your fourth year. The courage to springboard it and to get started,
Yes.
overcoming the perfectionism that you mentioned, that is courage that you need. And I can
Yes.
give you courage, but confidence you will get yourself over time. You will get the confidence yourself. Don't worry about confidence now. What do
I
you think about
agree.
that?
No, I agree with you wholly. Everything you just said, as a matter of fact, I had written down some notes and I'm like, I have, 4 key elements for kind of change management: conflict, composure, change, and competence.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you, but you first have to have courage enough to take the leap. Now,
Yes.
that doesn't mean if you haven't, proven out your business model and you should just rush out and put a bunch of money behind something because you have a gut feeling. I'm not telling you to do that. You got
Yes.
to validate your business model. But some
Mm-hmm.
often people have big ideas and they sit on it because they're just not, to your point, confident that they can pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you do have to surround yourself with resources. You do have to get a coach. You do have to have trial and error and have thick skin and be able to take some lumps, but you got to believe so deeply in what you're doing that you're going to get back up.
Yeah.
Dust yourself off and get
Yeah.
back and ride on that horse. And I think that's a perfect way of saying it. Confidence will happen once courage shows itself over and
Yes.
over and over. And that builds layers of confidence that will
Yeah.
allow you to weather any storm.
Yes. And what you said about the faith and the belief, that is, for the listeners of this podcast, incredibly important, because they prep so much for job search and career advancement by having a great resume or wanting to have a great resume, a great cover letter, but they forget to prep for faith. They forget to believe, So when you
Yes,
walk into an interview, because you have a great resume, but your faith and your belief and your courage isn't there, then that interview is not going to go well for you, because there's something about energy that happens, even
yes,
in online interviewing, that people just
absolutely.
can't sense. They can sense your stress, your anxiety.
It's like a dog smelling fear, right?
It
They can
is.
tell. And
Yeah.
and I've been in so many interviews the other end of the desk and listening to people, and I do my best to be as disarming as possible and relaxed. And so it's like, let them shine. This is not for me, it's just for them to be able to shine. And the people that ooze confidence, not cockiness, because I hate that,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
confidence. Confidence is attractive, by the way.
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
we want to be near people who are confident in themselves, in their skin, in their abilities, without going past the point where it's cockiness or narcissism. Of course, that's not good. But I think that whole idea of preparing mentally, more than just, learning about the company, learning about the job, telling your story, but it's how you tell your story, and how you project this air of confidence. And I even used a little Jedi mind trick when I was back in the day. And I knew I was like one of 2 or 3 final candidates. And I would write certain notes back and really try to set myself apart. And one way I did that with a company that I learned the team was very kind of, avant-garde a bit. They were, they loved to have fun. They were a little quirky. And so this was a few years back when David Letterman was retiring on his last show, and he had the top 10 list, right? And I came and sent the senior search committee team the top 10 reasons to hire Mark Mears. And of course, most of them were about the job function. But then the last one was kind of tied to an old Saturday Night Live skit, which is by Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. And
Yeah.
I showed the clip of that, and they loved that, right? And the Jedi mind trick I would use is, like, I'd send a follow-up note, and in the subject line, I'd say, new CMO or new whatever, Mark Mears. And so it planted in their mind that as if I was already hired. And
Yes.
it just little things like that I did to demonstrate confidence,
Mhm.
and yet, do so in a way that didn't come across cocky.
Yeah.
And so I think there's different tricks people can use depending on your industry and what works. Doesn't work for everybody in every situation, but those are just some examples of how to think about. You're probably as skilled as anybody else they're looking at.
Yes.
What can you do to set yourself apart where you become the obvious choice?
Yeah, no, that is exactly right. I think especially at that senior level. So for those listening, my advice would be to, at senior levels, interviews tend to be somewhat unstructured in most organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really about trust and likability. So if you can go into a conversation as if you were already part of the team, not an outsider, then that is good for you. Of course, try not to be cocky, I get it. But if you feel like you are already the new CMO, like you did,
Yes.
that's perfect.
And
In the
using the
first,
word "we," I mean, when I
yes,
was there, I'd say we.
yes,
When we, they're telling me some, issue. I said, well, when we work on this, we're going to, those are just ways that
yeah.
you're not being cocky by doing that.
No,
You're
but you
saying,
are
look,
you're
you're planting the
influencing the
seed.
decision making.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're planting the seed in their mind that
Yes.
you can already see themselves working with you on that problem.
Yes. Yeah. That's not my advice for younger professionals. I think it's harder to do because of the structure of the rest of the interview for early career professionals. It's really behavioral questions, and they want answers in a specific format. So if you're listening to this and you're, in your mid-20s, even early 30s, maybe that's not advice for you. But it's hard. It's hard to prep for senior executive interviews because they are unstructured. They're usually conversations. I have a client going for an interview early next week, and it's a walk around the factory with the CEO. It's not, and he
I,
was asking me, should I prepare a document to present to him? And I'm like, I don't think so. I think you should just go around and walk around as if you were the new
yeah,
C-level executive he is hiring, right?
absolutely. I did the same thing when I went on a ride with a CEO. We went to visit 4 or 5 restaurants. And so he wanted to show me, what I'd be getting myself into.
Yeah.
But B, he wanted to see me react and ask questions throughout, like, what do you think of this menu board? Or what do you think of this? Or what do you think of that decor? And, what would you do different? And, you got to plan to the best of your ability, but then you just got to have faith that when you open up your mouth, it's going to come out in a positive, confident way. And then sometimes you say, I don't know. I would have to study that further. That is a great question. And I don't want to give you an answer off the top of my head, but here's how I would think about it. Right. So you don't put them off. You just say, here's how I would think about it, so they can see your thought process. And no one could expect you to have, all the answers right there, even though you prepare to the best of your ability to do so. But they want to see how you think. People want critical thinkers. Don't be critical, but critically think about something in a way that shows that you can break down an issue in more than just a surface level way.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can't fault that. Thanks, Mark. Who are your clients today?
Well, I'm just getting started, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've been doing a little consulting here and there, and one of them, I spent literally a year embedded in the University of Kansas Alumni Association, helping them kind of update their brand, be more relevant to Jayhawks at all levels of their career. And we created the Jayhawk Career Network. And it's taking a mentoring foundation, but building on top of it. And it takes this kind of a match.com kind of algorithmic approach where students put together a profile and alums put together profiles, and then they match them together. And that way students can kind of, instead of going in job shadowing, they can spend 30 minutes an hour with an alum on what they're doing, what they like about it, how do they prepare for it, what would they do, and recommend them to do if they wanted a career in that same field. And so I got a chance to use everything that's in the book. We came up with vision, mission, values. We came up with the whole LEAF model and really gave it a test run, so that now I have credibility when I go to other places and say, has this worked at other places you've consulted? And I can say yes. And I've done it also with personal branding. helping, a friend of mine get a really good job. He was really qualified, but he didn't quite know how to tell his personal brand story. And I
Yes.
gave him, solutions on, hey, putting a video together, given his background in promotion, and also, using LinkedIn and creating content. People today are searching for you everywhere. And whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. So what I would tell young people that you mentioned earlier, protect your personal brand. You don't want to not get a job because you posted something that was inappropriate and you thought it was just among your friends. Well, if it gets found, and likely it will, by an employer, you got to look at yourself in the mirror and say, oops, should I have really done that? Did that really add value to my personal brand? And that's just the way of the world today. Know that it matters to an employer, because you're going to show up in a nice outfit with a bright, shiny resume and a well-polished speech for your interview, but that's not maybe who you really are. You're putting on a show. If people go back and they look at that and say, that's not who they came off as someone, or, in the interview, I don't know if I want to take a risk on them. I'm telling you, I've seen it.
Well, that argument that you're using about social media and the need to be careful is usually what people come to me when they say they don't want to engage on LinkedIn. And I know that you're very strong on LinkedIn, and so am I. And I
Yes.
think we both can
Why,
advocate for it. So,
why would you
what?
not?
Why would you not? Yeah.
I mean, it's the business, the number one, easily by far. I don't even know of a second. It's certainly not a close second, where it builds credibility for your
Mhm.
personal brand in a business environment. Hey,
Yes.
TikTok, we get it. It's entertainment. Instagram, it's, photos and entertainment. Facebook, maybe a little bit differently. Twitter, it can get political and get you in all kinds of trouble. But LinkedIn, people want to see, who do you follow? What are
Mhm.
you learning? Or do you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? Are
Mm.
you trying to get better? And who are your influences? And I would put that as part of your brand story. I
Mhm.
follow Richard Branson because, or I'm a big follower of so and so because. And here's
Mhm.
the key things I've learned from them.
Yeah.
Who would have a problem with that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the right approach. I agree. I think Twitter is watch this
Or
space. I was working, it's called X now, but I can't
X,
say
right?
that. It's so
I know, I
annoying.
can't either.
But I think that there is an interesting dialogue that happens at very, very senior levels on Twitter that I think if you are a C-level professional, a very high-ranking public servant, you might need to learn Twitter. And it's
Yes.
a tough, tough platform to be in. You have to be very careful. But it's worth, for some of my clients, it is a platform that's worth engaging in if you are very senior, or if you are young and have nothing to lose, quite frankly. Like, you can start some interesting threads there that are good. But LinkedIn is a much safer platform to start off if you want to become a thought leader or build your personal brand and reputation. So yeah.
Yeah. Plus, they have a lot of tools and courses you can take. Because,
Yeah.
before I was talking about management, we learn how to be managers, but we don't necessarily learn how to be leaders. Well, if you're waiting for your company to teach you how to be a better leader, good luck,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
there are a ton of resources out there. I would suggest my book, which literally provides a
Yeah.
roadmap. If you want to be a C-level leader someday, it gives you a roadmap. If you're young in your career and you want to know, what does it take to maybe someday get there? I wrote this as if I were trying to mentor a young Mark Mears. What if
Yes.
I knew then what I know now? What would I have done
Yes.
differently? What would I have, avoided? Right. So I've kind of done it all for you. And if you're a senior level executive, you say, well, I'm already, well, you're going to have to unlearn some behaviors in this new world of work. So there's
Absolutely.
things there for you, or maybe you're ready for your second act and you want to get away from the corporate world and do something different. There's inspiration for you as well. But it's really, the target is middle managers who feel stuck and they feel like the clock is ticking and they don't feel maybe that they're working on purpose. They're just doing it for a paycheck to help, afford, kids' college or save for a wedding or retirement someday. All those things are important, but you're kind of sacrificing your life today. And
Yeah.
one of the things I keep talking about is going from leader to living legacy builder. The
Mhm.
one thing I know, Renata, and I know you're in Australia and I'm in America, it doesn't matter what our time zones are, doesn't matter what our genders are, race, creed, color, sexual orientation, or preference. All I know is that we have one thing in common. We all have 24 hours in a day.
That's true.
How you use those 24 hours is up to you. We have a choice, right? If you choose to stay at a dead end job that you know isn't satisfying, to just chase a buck, that's a choice you make. Maybe that's the choice you're in this season of your life, because we all go through different seasons. And we talk about purpose, but I believe the word is purposeful. That's why I call it the purposeful growth revolution, because we may not know our purpose at this point in time. It may change over different seasons of life. That's fine. But like I was telling you, that if you think about it and you're really deeply introspective, there's probably a thread that's woven throughout your experiences that help light you up. It provides the who you serve, the why you do it, your motivations or purpose, the how you're uniquely gifted that leads into the what you do. And so I take issue with the old Simon Sinek model of start with why. I believe we should start with who. Again, specifically who we serve. And back to that 4-circle Venn diagram, I think there's 4 realms of service: spiritual, relational, personal, and professional. We're whole people. And we need to be able to feel comfortable bringing our whole self into the workplace. In my day, it was don't bring your personal stuff into the office, leave it at home, keep your nose to the grindstone, get your job done, keep your head down. And today, that old command and control style, again, is going away. And so I believe that to go from a leader to a legacy builder, all we need is love. And no, not the kind of love that's going to get you a quick call from HR and escorted out of the building, but it's a model which stands for listen, observe, value, and empower. Those are just some of Maslow's most basic hierarchy of needs that he talked about, years and years and years ago. But it also comes down to the golden rule of treating others the way you'd want to be treated, right? We all need to feel seen and heard. We all want to be valued, and we want to be empowered to be our very best. So listen to what people are saying and what they're not saying. If we're whole people, some of us maybe are caring for elderly parents. Some of us may have a sick kid who's ready to go into surgery. Some of us may have, relational issues with our spouse or whatever it is that might impact our productivity. So if you're a leader and you're listening to a team member, not an employee or a worker or dreaded, staffer or something like that, you're going to be asking questions too. And then you're going to want to observe them and coach them and encourage them in real time. Don't wait for the dreaded annual performance appraisal no one does well and no one likes, but provide real-time coaching and value the whole person and demonstrate that value by appreciating them and showing you're grateful for what they are and who they are and what they do for the team. So over and above reward and recognition, give them ways to learn and grow, and then empower them to be their very best. I don't know about you, Renata, but when I was growing up, I remember, learning to ride a trike. And then I remember the day I got a bike. Well, I had training wheels on it because I wasn't ready just to ride by myself. But then came that Saturday morning when it was time to take the training wheels off. I got on that bike with a sense of pride, mom and dad pushing me down the sidewalk, but running with me for a while and then taking their hands off. And of course, I wobbled and fell a few times and they dusted me off and got me back on the bike. But I remember that sense of freedom when I was finally able to pedal for myself. That empowered feeling of being able to ride, and the neighborhood got bigger, my world got bigger, and I felt a sense of satisfaction that I'd never felt before. Imagine being able to treat your team members like that and giving them that same sense of empowerment. Then you wouldn't have the great resignation, which I call the great repurposing. Then you wouldn't have quiet quitting. You would have engaged team members who want to give their very best. And so by demonstrating love in the workplace, it helps me along my journey to kind of put the human back in human resources. And I say it's easy. All we need is love. Listen, observe, value, and empower. So those of you who are looking to get back into the workforce, when you do, I pray you will lead differently by creating this ripple effect, which is what I mean by a living legacy. Because management is all about transactions, and we got to have that. Leadership is all about building relationships, and that's the next rung up. But the living legacy building aspect is when it's transformational, where the people that want to follow you also want to emulate you and be leaders likewise. And that's how we will create this purposeful growth revolution and change the paradigm from command and control to a more humanistic way of work.
Mark, I have to give it to you. You're such a good storyteller.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad we've had this conversation. I learned so much from you. I love all your acronyms and your frameworks, and the way
Yeah.
that you explain things are making a lot of sense to me. I think the listeners will love hearing this. I feel a lot of people want to embrace purpose, but they don't feel brave enough. And the purposeful career, purposeful leadership, all of what you said, I think not only is something that people should do, I think they need to do. I think that, what you said about the dodo
Being
approach
extinct.
to
Yeah.
yes, some things that we have grown up with and have learned to accept
Tolerate. Yeah.
are not going to be in the workplace. It shouldn't be in the workplace in the future. So thank you so much for coming on the Job Hunting Podcast to share with us all of that knowledge that you've been developing with your great book. I want to put a link to the book below. I want to put a link to your LinkedIn and your newsletter, because it's a great read for those who want for little sound bites. And the link
Well,
to
there's also a
your website.
self-assessment. Yes, you just mentioned
yeah.
markamears.com. And when you go
Okay.
there, there's a self-assessment, a purposeful growth self-assessment right there on the homepage. It takes about 5 or 6 minutes, but it will provide kind of a benchmark on where you are currently on this whole concept of purposeful growth, as well as how aligned is your work with your purpose,
Nice.
right? And so it follows the 4 key sections of the book. And then once you've completed it, you can immediately download a PDF that has your customized report with your results, and then what I call seeds for growth from me after every question. And so it'll be a kind of a gateway into discovery on purposeful growth, what it is, what it means to you currently, how your job is aligning currently or not, and then this whole notion of giving back and scattering your seeds for purposeful growth to help others along their journey. People have to be courageous, but they have to just search their heart. And I believe everybody deep down wants that. They just need someone to help them get there. And I'd like to be your guide.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much. We couldn't have finished in a better way. I'm so glad that you came on board, and you're now a member of our community. So keep in touch. And
Yes.
if you ever want to come back and speak about this topic or another topic on the podcast, you're welcome to do so. We would love to have you.
It's my pleasure.